Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Are you ready to get real about relationships?
Always.
Today we're tackling a topic that I think a lot of us can relate to, insecurities in relationships.
Yeah, for sure. It's something that pretty much everyone experiences at some point.
Exactly. And we're going to be using a podcast called Overcoming Insecurities, Building Confidence in Relationships as our guide.
I'm excited to dig into this one.
Me too. So, everyone always talks about the importance of open communication and self-love, but this podcast actually gives us concrete steps on how to put those ideas into practice.
You know what really struck me about this podcast was how they normalize those feelings right from the start.
Yeah, totally. It's like they get it. They understand that insecurities are a normal part of being human.
Exactly. They don't sugarcoat it.
So they start off by encouraging us to really pinpoint those specific triggers.
Hmm.
What is it that sets off those insecure feelings?
Right. It's not enough to just say, oh, I'm feeling insecure. We need to dig a little deeper, figure out the why.
Exactly. And they give some really relatable examples like fear of abandonment, feeling inadequate, or, maybe past experiences that are shaping our present anxieties.
Oh, past experiences. That's a huge one.
It is. And it makes me wonder if they delve into those deeper psychological roots, because sometimes those insecurities run pretty deep.
They do, and this is where it gets really interesting. They talk about how our childhood experiences and those early relationships with caregivers can actually influence how we relate to others as adults.
Wait, hold on. So you're saying that my childhood could be contributing to my relationship drama today?
It's definitely possible. They talk about the concept of attachment styles.
Attachment styles.
Okay,
Break that down for me.
sure. So basically think about it. If you had a caregiver who was consistently responsive to your needs as a child, you're more likely to develop a secure attachment style, which makes you feel more comfortable with intimacy and vulnerability as an adult.
That makes sense.
But if those early relationships were inconsistent or unreliable, it can lead to anxious or avoidant attachment styles, which can definitely show up as insecurity in adult relationships.
Wow, that is mind-blowing.
Yeah.
So basically, our past can really impact our present relationships in ways we might not even realize.
Exactly. And that's why self-awareness is so important.
Okay, so we've identified our insecurities. We've explored the possible root causes. Now what?
Now we need to figure out how to deal with them in a healthy way.
Right. So what does the podcast recommend?
Well, one of the biggest takeaways is the power of open communication, but they go beyond the typical just talk it out advice.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more.
They talk about a technique called mirroring, which involves reflecting your partner's concerns back to them to make sure you truly understand their perspective.
So instead of just saying, I hear you, you might say, it sounds like you're feeling hurt because
Exactly. It shows that you're really listening and trying to understand their point of view.
I can see how that would help to de-escalate potential conflicts.
And it also builds empathy, which is so crucial in any relationship.
Okay, mirroring. We have to try that one. But, sometimes even when I want to have those open conversations, my own insecurities get in the way.
Yeah, I get that. It can be tough to be vulnerable, especially when you're already feeling insecure.
Exactly. So what's the solution?
The podcast emphasizes the importance of using I statements, but with a little twist.
A twist. I'm intrigued.
It's not just about saying, I feel insecure, Juanita. It's about framing those statements in a way that avoids blame and focuses on your own emotional experience.
Okay, so for example,
Instead of saying, I feel insecure when you talk to other people, you might say, I sometimes worry when you talk to other people.
that's subtle, but I can see how it would make a difference. It takes the focus off of accusing your partner and puts it on your own feelings.
Exactly. And it opens up the door for a more productive conversation.
That's so helpful. I feel like I'm already learning so much from this deep dive, and we're just getting started.
I know there's so much more to uncover.
Well, then let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back and explore some more strategies for overcoming insecurities in relationships. Stay tuned. All right, we are back and ready to continue our deep dive into overcoming insecurities, building confidence in relationships.
So where did we leave off?
Well, we were just talking about the importance of communication and how to use I statements effectively.
Right, and how even with the best communication skills, sometimes those insecurities just keep creeping in.
Exactly. So what else does the podcast suggest for tackling those deeper-rooted insecurities?
Well, they talk a lot about the importance of self-confidence. But again, they go beyond those typical love yourself platitudes.
Okay, so how do they frame self-confidence in the context of relationships?
Well, they emphasize that real self-confidence isn't about being arrogant or needing constant validation from others. It's about cultivating a deep sense of self-worth and recognizing your inherent value regardless of your relationship status.
So it's more about the inner security than needing someone else to tell you you're worthy.
Precisely. And they connect this to the idea of self-efficacy.
Self-efficacy. That's a new one for me.
It's basically the belief in your own ability to handle challenges and achieve your goals.
Okay. So how does that tie into overcoming insecurities?
Think of it this way. If you believe you can handle tough situations and overcome obstacles, you're less likely to let those insecurities take over.
So it's like having that I got this attitude.
Exactly. And the podcast suggests practical ways to cultivate self-efficacy, like setting realistic goals, celebrating your accomplishments, and focusing on your strengths.
I like that. It's about taking control of your own narrative instead of
Yeah.
letting those insecurities define you.
Exactly. Now, another thing that really stood out to me in the podcast was how they incorporated real-life examples from their listeners. It made the concept so much more relatable.
Oh, yeah, totally. Like that story about the listener who was constantly comparing themselves to their partner's successful career.
Right. They were always feeling inadequate and insecure about their own accomplishments.
But then they had this amazing breakthrough.
Well,
They finally realized that their self-worth wasn't tied to their career success. So they started focusing on things that brought them joy, like gardening and volunteering.
and how did that shift impact their relationship?
It was huge. They rediscovered that sense of purpose and fulfillment, and it totally transformed their outlook. It's like they finally filled their own cup, so to speak.
You can't pour from an empty cup, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And speaking of filling our cups, the podcast also shared a really powerful story about a listener who found that opening up about their insecurities actually brought them closer to their partner.
Oh, I remember that one. They were terrified of being vulnerable, but they finally took the leap. And their partner responded with so much empathy and understanding. It was amazing. They were able to have this honest, heartfelt conversation, and it deepened their connection.
See, that's what I love about vulnerability.
Yeah,
It can be scary, but it can also be so incredibly powerful.
it's like Brene Brown says, vulnerability is the birthplace of love, belonging, joy, courage, empathy, and creativity.
Such a great quote. Okay, so we've talked about communication, self-confidence, vulnerability. What else did this podcast goldmine have to offer?
Well, they also emphasize that sometimes we need a little extra help on this journey of overcoming insecurities.
You mean like therapy?
Exactly. And they stress that therapy is not a sign of weakness. It's actually a really proactive step towards self-improvement and building stronger relationships.
I love that they normalized seeking professional support because sometimes we just need a little guidance from an expert, right?
Absolutely. Therapy can provide a safe space to explore those deeper issues, develop coping mechanisms, and learn effective communication strategies.
It's like having a coach in your corner cheering you on.
Precisely.
Oh.
But one thing I really appreciated was how the podcast emphasized that dealing with insecurities is an ongoing process, not a destination.
So it's not about completely eradicating insecurities because let's be real, those pesky little voices might always pop up from time to time.
Exactly. It's more about learning to manage them in a healthy way.
So it's about building resilience.
Exactly. And they highlighted that the journey itself can be incredibly rewarding. As we work through our insecurities, we gain a deeper understanding of ourselves and our partners, which can lead to stronger, more fulfilling relationships.
I love that perspective. It's about growth and evolution, both individually and as a couple.
And it's about recognizing that we're all in this together. We all have insecurities. It's part of being human.
Absolutely. So before we wrap up, I want to circle back to self-confidence for a second. We talked about how important it is, but I'd love to hear some more practical tips for how to actually boost our self-confidence.
You got it. The podcast suggests things like practicing self-care, pursuing personal interests, and celebrating our accomplishments.
I like that. It's about nurturing ourselves,
Yeah,
recognizing our own worth.
exactly. And self-care doesn't have to be anything fancy. It can be as simple as taking a relaxing bath, going for a walk in nature, or reading a good book.
Whatever fills your cup.
And pursuing personal interests is a great way to tap into your passions and discover new sides of yourself.
Like maybe taking that pottery class you've always wanted to try.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or learning a new language, or joining a hiking group. It's all about exploring what lights you up.
I love that.
Yeah.
And then celebrating our accomplishments, both big and small, helps to build that sense of pride and self-belief.
It's about acknowledging our wins and giving ourselves credit where credit is due. The more we celebrate ourselves, the more confident we become.
These are all such great tips. I feel like we've been given this amazing toolkit for building self-confidence and in turn building stronger, more secure relationships.
I agree. This podcast was a real gem. It offered so much valuable insight and practical advice.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, What's the big takeaway for our listeners? So as we wrap up this deep dive on insecurities in relationships, what's the big takeaway for our listeners?
Well, I think the most important message is that insecurities are normal. It's not about erasing them completely, because that's probably not realistic.
Right. It's more about learning to manage them and not letting them control us.
Exactly. And the podcast gave us so many tools to do that. Open communication, mirroring self-awareness, building self-efficacy, seeking support when needed. It's like having this whole toolkit for building stronger, more resilient relationships.
I love that toolkit analogy. And what I really appreciate is how the podcast emphasized that addressing our insecurities head on can actually lead to deeper, more fulfilling connections.
It's like turning those vulnerabilities into opportunities for growth.
Exactly. So instead of viewing insecurities as weaknesses, we can see them as invitations for greater understanding, both of ourselves and our partners.
Beautifully said.
So to sum it all up, it sounds like the key is to be proactive, not reactive. When those insecure feelings pop up, we have a choice. We can either let them control us, or we can use these tools to navigate them in a healthy way.
And remember, even small steps can make a big difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So maybe it's starting a conversation with your partner, scheduling that therapy appointment, or simply taking some time for self-care.
Or maybe it's finally signing up for that pottery class you've been putting off.
Exactly. It's about taking those little steps towards self-discovery and growth.
So as we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with a question. What's one specific action you can take today to address any insecurities that might be affecting your relationships?
That's a great question. And remember, you're not alone in this. We all have insecurities, but with awareness, compassion, and the right tools, we can transform those insecurities into stepping stones towards stronger, more fulfilling relationships.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. But thank you so much for joining us on this insightful exploration of relationships and insecurities.
This is my pleasure.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep growing, and keep building those beautiful connections.
And never forget, you are worthy of love and belonging just as you are.
That's a perfect note to end on. See you next time.